Everybody have a copy? Okay, we're on page 68 in the Lively Encounters chapter. This is one of the longer encounters recorded. It's very rich. I don't know that we'll get through it even in 2 classes, but we can try. This encounter is taking place between a bhikshu, a monk called Fada, meaning penetrating the Dharma, or Dharma penetration, and Master Hui Neng. And we've gotten to this point in the encounter where he comes in rather boastful, kind of full of himself for his ability to have recited the Lotus Sutra over 3,000 times, about a 10-year undertaking. And of course, to do this means he's doing it all day long. It's not intermittent. He's really focused and concentrating. And while he feels that this is an accomplishment, there's probably something in him that also is not sure if it's really an accomplishment, because he's coming to pay his respects. And usually, you come to pay your respects in this way, it's not just like going on a pilgrimage where you go to a shrine and you kind of pay your respects, but this has more to do with you're actually seeking for something, you're searching for something, especially if you go and pay your respects to a teacher like this. At the beginning part, it's like you're really opening your docile and you really want to learn. If you're more advanced like he is or thinks he is, you're maybe going to see what he's got compared to what you got, or to get a little confirmation for what you got. Because if you have something but nobody tells you have anything, it's not for sure you have it. You know how that works? I mean, you can be a great poet and you've never published. You're just sitting there, you think it's great, but until you get some accolades or attention, you don't really know. So maybe he's going to get a little certification. And sometimes it's maybe going to say that you went, that you saw this great master, you sat at the feet of this great master. Many motives here, but also maybe because there's some doubt in his own mind after 10 years of this practice, whether in fact it's brought him what he thought. Why would that be? What would it be in someone who's practicing this way would cause them to have that sort of uncertainty? Any thoughts on that? I know it's a cold Friday night and the thinking apparatus is just a little rusty, clunkety clunk. When you're cultivating, when you're doing this path of cultivation, it often arises in your mind, how do I know I'm making progress? How do I know I'm advancing? And that thought alone can grind things to a stop. And one of the reasons it comes up is because either one starts out with this idea that awakening is this incredible light sound performance where, it's like the sky opens and bam, boom, you're totally different. Or more mundanely, you feel it in a day-to-day way, whether your life is changing or becoming better. So sometimes Bodhi isn't about this incredible explosive event. My Christian friends use the word Paul on the road to Damascus, where he gets knocked off his donkey or his horse or something, whatever, and he has this life-changing experience. Most of us riding our cars daily don't get that bolt of lightning through the top of the car where we pull over and say, wow, my life is, Well, so more it's this incremental understanding. So the measure is, how do I know I'm making progress? How do I know I'm advancing? And one of the things is that your afflictions, your klesha become less. The greed, the anger, the desire, the jealousy. It just starts to fade away. Moreover, you just feel a general sense of true purpose and meaning as you go about your way. And it's nothing, quote, dramatic, but it's centered. It's true. Now, he might have misgivings at this point that he doesn't have those feelings. Moreover, he might have thought, if I do this for 10 years, something dramatic's going to happen, and maybe nothing's happened yet. And so there's this anxiety that he might be having. In any event, we get to this point where he's brought down by the master, brought down to a docile position where he can learn. And the master said, and we're beginning on page 68, the Dharma is profoundly penetrating, but your mind has not penetrated. There's nothing doubtful in the text. The doubts are in your mind. Now, he started out by saying, he asked the question, will the master please explain a little bit about the text for me, because I'm not really clear about it. Harvard doubts. And again, we don't know what those doubts are specifically. It could be doubts about whether this is working with his practice, or doubts about the philosophical content of the text. Remember, one of the key lines of this text is basically that all beings have the Buddha nature and all can become Buddha. And he may have a personal doubt that I don't know if I'm capable of that. I don't know. So this is one of the three areas of doubt. Classically, you doubt the teachings, or you can doubt the teacher, or you can doubt yourself. And you have to get past all three of those to make progress. But the most fundamental is doubting yourself, not believing in yourself. So it could be he's having doubts here. The Sixth Patriarch says, you haven't penetrated it. Then he says, very interesting, there's nothing doubtful about the text. The doubts are in your mind. So he moves away from, I would say the first level is the doubt of the teacher manifest in this. For example, he comes in like, who's this? And he does this like bough where he doesn't touch his head to the ground. That's skeptical, doubting the teacher. Now the teacher pulls the rug on him and says, oh, blah, 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 you're this way, you're that way. He goes, whoa, I've been beat. I don't doubt the teacher anymore. Now I have doubts about the teachings. And he goes in and he said, well, there's nothing doubtful about the teachings, the doubts in your mind. Whoa. So now just in this short exchange, the Sixth Patriarchs brought him back to the deeper area of doubt, his own mind, his own thinking. And then he does this exercise. He says, you recite the sutra, but what do you think its core teaching is? What's the essence of this text? Which is a really important question to ask when you're reading any of these spiritual texts. What's the gist of it? What's the essence? What is it aiming at? And Fa-Da, now a little bit more chastened, not sort of saying, well, I'll tell you what the essence is. It's, he says, this student is dull and slow. So there's some humbleness going on. All along, I've only recited by rote. So how could I understand its main purport? Now he has a real interesting insight. He's basically either admitting or seeing for the first time that he wasn't understanding the text because he had merely committed his practice to memorizing it and reciting it, almost like a parrot. Very talented parent, of course. I don't know if any parrot can really do this, but there's people that can memorize huge chunks of text from various traditions and recite them, but have no understanding of what it actually means. It's sort of there's a expression from Monkey, Journey to the West, where Pigsy meets a date for the first time and just starts swallowing the dates. And after about 7 or 8 dates, he turns to, who is it? Pigsy turns to Monkey and says, what do they taste like? And this swallowing the date holds an expression for taking something in but not thinking about it, not digesting it. And here, he has now said for 10 years he's been doing this, but he's never thought about the meaning. The master says, I cannot read, but if you recite it for me, I'll explain it to you. So now the exchange goes back and forth. The master says he can explain it, but he can't read it, which then brings him back to the ground. How is it that he knows the meaning of the text when he can't read it? And how is it someone who's read it and recited and memorized it doesn't know the meaning? So there's an interesting tension here of where meaning and where penetration occurs. Again, what he's saying is it's in your mind. Your mind has to be open and cultivated to the point that when you encounter a teaching, something catalyzes. If not, it can be very, very profound and it'll never penetrate. So again, going back to his name, Fa-Da then recited the sutra aloud, and when he came to the chapter of parables, the master said, anybody know the chapter on parables? chapter 4. So he's into it pretty much at the beginning stages here. And the parables, how many people have read this sutra? 1, 2. Does that mean you kind of read it? You really read it, or? I read it but didn't penetrate it, huh? Okay. Well, tonight we'll go into it a little bit. Okay. So in this, it's a very famous passage because sometimes the Buddha uses parables or analogies to take us from something we know or understand to a place that we don't understand. And so the parable is like a bridge. So this parable, one of the most famous parables in this text on chapter 4, is the parable of the burning house, which some of you know about. I won't go into tonight, but in essence, he compares our life and the realm that we're in to living in a burning house, or our unexamined existence to living in a burning house where we're with our playthings and toys and whatnot. But the house is decaying, it's on fire. But we don't know it's on fire because we're oblivious, because we're caught up in our passions and desires and amusements and divertissements and so forth. And there's an elder, a father, a kind father who wants to get the kids to get out of the house because it's on fire, but he can't alarm them. He can't get their attention because they're so drunk, intoxicated by the materialism. And so he comes up with an expedient means to get them out of the house, promising them even better toys on the outside. And of course, they all run out the house, they're saved and so forth, and it goes on. It's a wonderful parable. And we won't have to go on what it stands for. I mean, you can understand that it still might be a little bit relevant. 2016, Parable of the Burning House, lost in materialism, not aware, anyhow. Don't want to hammer it, but you could so what I'm saying is you could recite that and you could memorize that and think it had nothing to do with you. Or you could recite it and memorize it and think about it and say, oh my God, this is like a perfect example of my situation. Whoa. Or the situation generally throughout the world of this unaware, day-to-day, unexamined living. Okay, so he gets to this chapter 4, and then the master says, and I'll read this section, stop there. The central teaching of the sutra has always been about the reasons why the Buddhas or Buddha appears in the world. All of its parables address this. What are the reasons? The sutra says, and he then repeats it. All the Buddhas, world-honored ones, appear in the world because of the one great matter. The one great matter is the knowledge and vision of a Buddha. Okay. Now, he then hits at this point and says, this is what this text is about. This is what Buddhism is about. This is what the whole thing is about. It's the one great matter. And the one great matter he lists here as the knowledge and vision, knowing and seeing what an awakened, totally awakened being sees and knows. That is suggested here as what our meaning and purpose of being alive is, to get at this, to penetrate this, to understand this. This knowledge and vision of the Buddha is driven also by a knowledge and vision of our own mortality. So there's two sides of looking at this knowledge and vision. What causes the Buddha to pursue this path to understanding, to full awakening? It's because when he was young, he was really struck, powerfully struck by the impermanence of things. That there's birth, but then there's just a short time where we're healthy and abiding, and then disease, decay sets in, and then we pass away. And he observes all this happening to everything around him, not just to him and not just to others, but it's the universal human condition. It's the condition of life, because planets and stars go through this process as well. Microbes up to the, as far as we can observe, this is going on. So the knowledge and vision of a Buddha comes from the knowledge and vision of this pressing issue of the passing, the impermanence. And they feed each other. And so one has an urgency to it. The other is as profound. I won't say curiosity because that's a little weak. It's more like a hunger to know if this is the case, that we're born only to die. The hunger is to know why. What's this about? And what are we to make of that interval in between? So this is that urgent one great matter. And you can see that in many ways it lies behind a lot of great thought, philosophy, literature, and in different degrees it's pursued. Sometimes it's pursued to penetration, sometimes it's pursued to escape. Sometimes it's pursued to be denied. But in any way, it's there. It's the, I don't want to overuse this metaphor, the elephant in the room. But it is, in fact, the elephant in the room, our own mortality. Sometimes it's the elephant in front of the mirror in the morning. You go and look. It's like, whoa, gee, that's looks a little different than yesterday or whatnot. I was just looking through a family album the other night with my little, I guess they're grandnieces now. Wow, I'm getting old. My nieces, these are the next generation. Who dat? Who dat? That's me. That's you. Whoa, that's not you. You got brown hair. No, I got white. And they go through what are the wrinkles? And they go through this whole thing. That can't be you. That's you. Well, then, who's that? That's your mother. That's not my mother. And so out of their eyes, they only know what's now. They only know the abiding. They don't know the getting old, the aging, and whatnot. And they don't see it, of course, in themselves. But as you go on, the mirrors don't do what they used to. They start to get really funny, and they present a different face. And that, is that part of that one great matter. And so here, now by contrast, the text goes in and says, ordinary people, now contrasting. And again, ordinary people doesn't mean common people of a social and economic lower class or middle class. It's not referring to that. It's a contrast to spiritual seeking or spiritually awakened people as ordinary people. So the demarcation here is not intelligence, wealth, good fortune or whatnot. The demarcation for this is if you are on a path addressing this one great matter, you're no longer ordinary in the sense that you're not just living in a dream and dying drunk. You are actually purposely pursuing. Now, you may not feel you've penetrated very much at all. You may not feel that you're awakened, but you are on a Buddha path. You're on a path of awakening. And that's the whole important distinction between that and an ordinary person is someone who hasn't quite put it together enough to think there's something I should do about my life here in regards to this one great matter. And so they go on, and he describes what that is. He says, ordinary people, confused about the external world attached to appearances. So their response when confronting this one great matter is to then go out and grab at material things and think that they can stave off the ghost of impermanence, or whatever you want to call it, by this acquisition of things. In a sense, giving a false sense of immortality because I have clothes that are, fresh and clean. I have food that's organic and really healthy. I have a first-rate HMO. Count your blessings if you do right now. Oops, editorialized. I'm young. I'm healthy. I work out. I go to the club, whatever. And you can get very easily into a sort of dreamlike state where you feel as if you beat the game, you beat the ghost, because you've got all these external things propping you up. And then even if you can keep those, the proper upper doesn't hold. That's me. I can buy new clothes, but I look really silly in them. They're starting, my body doesn't hold them up as they used to. I can take in really good food, but it doesn't seem to give me years back. It doesn't seem to give me that extra vitality. I can chew all the ginseng I want, but I'm still, getting tired more and climbing the stairs is hard and whatnot. So you attach these external experiences, but in the end, it's bitter. But again, by the end, if you haven't used some time to cultivate, it's doubly bitter because you've invested in appearances and they haven't come through. And so he says, they attach, they cling to, they grasp, they seek these appearances. They're confused inwardly and they cling to emptiness. And he's saying, even if perhaps they begin to meditate or do something, they go another path where they then cling to a denial of the appearances and they cling to an empty innerness. They want to zone out and tune out. And so they think the end of suffering is the end of awareness, the end of consciousness, and they sink into an emptiness. The Buddha really was very clear at describing this. He said it can happen where you sink into an emptiness of hedonistic existence. You're just going from pleasure to pleasure, but it's got an underlying deep emptiness to it. It's like the poem Don Juan by Byron describes a young man who has who pursues pleasure to the nth degree, and then by the mid-20s is already burned out because there's nothing more to experience. And so the emptiness is right at the wake of this boat as it's passing through the water. But the Buddha also said that you can get this through drugs and intoxicants. You can go into an emptiness in your existence by immunizing yourself to sensation. So you can self-medicate in a sense through alcohol, drugs, and so forth, or by entertainment. There's many ways to do this, or by busyness. You see, there's another way. It doesn't look like it's, oh, my life's really full. I'm really busy. I got, this career and that career and blah, blah, blah. But behind it is this lurking emptiness. And it's in emptiness, but it's in a busyness. So emptiness doesn't mean you're just sitting around in a closet, mournful and depressed and thinking about taking your life. It can actually paradoxically manifest as overcompensation by really, really busy working week, not a moment. I had a friend who was a Buddhist, and he was a dentist, and he started to cultivate, and he was pretty good and whatnot. And the next time I saw him, he's like totally frazzled and burned. I thought, what happened? He said, well, I started to cultivate, and and then I started like, gee, I only got one dental office. Maybe I should open another, but I don't know. He said, then I went to this seminar in Hawaii. I said, what kind of seminar? Well, it wasn't a Buddhist seminar. It was one of those, what do you call those? Cheerleading, yes, self-improvement, but what's motivation, yeah, motivation seminars. And he said, there was a guy there, and he seemed really full of life. And I thought, wow, this guy's got it. And what he said, well, he said, the secret to life is to never let yourself really think. Because if you think, you'll be facing the one great matter. So I tell you what, you stay really busy. Don't let yourself have a moment's break from, and how do you do that? You set goals you can't possibly achieve. Wow. No, come on, you guys are laughing. This guy's serious. He's paying $500 a day for this advice. And the guy's saying, so if you are a doctor, expand your practice. Take on more patients. If you're a dentist, why settle for one office? And this guy's thinking, yeah. So he comes back to Los Angeles and he goes to 2 offices. Why 2? I'm actually being able to manage this, maybe 3. So he got to 3 and he couldn't manage it anymore, but he wasn't happy. You see, it didn't really work because he was burning out, but it's a kind of emptiness. So when I saw him, he was physiologically empty, but psychologically and spiritually drained too, and wondering, where's all this leading? Because there is no space I have to think. But I'm burning out rather than glowing, rather than illuminating. Yes?
So I feel like there are moments where people who pursue their profession, there's a type of vigor that is generated. So how do you know when there's vigor and energy that is generated versus being burned out?
Well, this is the I guess the statement of the wise. I have a calligraphy scroll that was given to me by an elder monk in China with 4 characters. And at that time, I think I was a little energetic about getting enlightened. And so the scroll was Zhizu Changle. It's 4 characters, and basically it says knowing enough, always happy. Or you could say knowing when to stop, knowing what's sufficient. And that is, I don't want to give an answer so much as to say that's what you have to really contemplate. If you're cultivating, you have to know where that stopping point is, where it's too little and where it's too much. And it doesn't matter, you can do it as a monastic. You could say, where in my monastic life do I go too far? Or where do I stop short? Where is that balance point? But you could say as a young person or as someone full in the life of your career, where is enough? Where is enough? I mean, it's such a simple thing. And yet, my teacher will often say, on the very, very basics, he said, most of us don't know enough. He said, when it comes to food, we either eat too little or we overeat. We eat the wrong foods, and so forth, or we eat them in excess. He says, every day, you kind of think, did I do it right today? Did I get eating down? Not quite. And he says, clothes. He says, when's enough? And he said, do you ever get it just right? Do you ever get the clothes that are just right? Aren't you constantly going, shifting, adjusting, buying more than you need, wanting more than you need? having more than you need, and then going the opposite of not having enough, and so forth. And then he says sleep, it's the same way. What's enough sleep? You had a really good night's sleep? 2 days in a row, 3 days in a row? He said, so on the very basics like this, now you go into career or majors at college or whatever you do, or relationships or possessions. When's enough? So the Jurzu, knowing when it's enough, is really an art. So I don't have necessarily an answer, but I would say what this text is saying, the answer is obvious, available, apparent to you if you just take time to listen and look. In other words, you have to listen to yourself and feel, and not just think, but feel, because if you think it's enough, you'll never get there. But if you start to feel it and ask, where's that balancing point? Where's my life actually in some kind of harmony? And it'll have to do with managing these things. It's not just spiritual. And you will know that by yourself. I would say you probably know the answer already, right? Yeah, if you just tune in. So it's really a matter of just paying attention and not having, because what's enough for me may not be enough for you. And what's too little for you might not be too little for me, and so forth. So the middle way is not some abstract, great middle way. It is the middle way, the balance point for you, day to day, moment to moment, thought to thought, staying in that middle space where it's not too little, not too much. My teacher had a great line when we were cultivating. He says, too fast you'll trip, too slow you fall behind. Not too fast, not too slow, you get there right on time. And so it's the same thing with this. But one of the things is if you're starting to feel that emptiness, you have to pause and pull back and examine, why am I empty? So he says, this is what ordinary people do. If you can remain unmoved by appearances while right in the midst of appearances, and not cling to emptiness while in the midst of emptiness, then inside and outside nothing will confuse you. So now he's steering this between the two extremes. He's saying it doesn't mean you leave the world, you leave the appearances of things. You're right within it, but you're not confused by it. And it doesn't mean you don't cultivate stillness and a meditative path, but at the same time, you don't dwell and you don't cling to that emptiness. So this is the perfection that's sometimes portrayed as movement and stillness, stillness and movement. While you're moving, you have equilibrium and equanimity. And while you're calm and still and by yourself, you still have a mind that's processing, engaging. The Avatamsaka says, this mind, this heart, everywhere examines and yet is always still. It's a really beautiful expression. Everywhere examines, yet is always still. So meditation like this is not just pulling in and saying, I'm meditating, don't bother me. But meditating would be while you're moving. You still have balance, you still have equanimity, you see things clearly. And while you're doing that, you're still seeing that these are nothing to get, nothing to cling to. These are just phenomena. And you deal with them appropriately, but you don't grab and attach either way. This is the nimbleness he's talking about. Then inside out, nothing will confuse you. If you understand this teaching, you will gain awakening instant. This, he says, the Buddha's knowledge and vision is simply this. Now, very interesting what he's done, as you probably noticed, he's moved it away from saying the great Buddha's knowledge and vision, which is this metaphysical abstract thing, and I'm going to tell you what the 10 powers are of a Buddha. He doesn't do that at all. He goes right to the person and says, if you can understand this, if you can, in the midst of your material existence, not be totally lost and confused and befuddled by it, and in the midst of your spiritual practice, not pull away from an overarching deep presence in reality, and that still time have that stillness. If you can do that, that's a knowledge and vision of a Buddha. So it's very close at hand, and yet at the same time, it's very subtle when you actually start to find those balancing points and look for them. And so a lot of what meditation is about, for example, the 45 minutes we sit here tonight, is just to stop and listen. Just to stop and listen. Just to take note. It isn't to penetrate emptiness or to attain anuttara samyak sambodhi necessarily. I mean, that'd be great if you could do it on a Friday night, but it's not that. It's just sort of saying, at this time, on maybe one day only in a week for 45 minutes, you stop and take stock and listen and do an inventory of what's going on, where those points are, whether they're in balance, whether you are too much caught up or too withdrawn, and you adjust and you adjust. It's actually a kind of essential thing. Eat, sleep, wear clothes, and do this at least, well, maybe once a day, or at the very least once a week. Every day is good because you eat, sleep, wear clothes every day. You probably do a little of this every day. And he's saying this is how accessible, this is how close the Buddha is. It's not very far away. And now we'll go a little further here. He says Buddha means awakened. And so now what he's doing, he's saying this isn't necessarily a being. This is not some god. This is not some deity. Buddha means awakened one. Whoever is awakened is Buddha. Small b. Okay, so this is really important to understand. Now he's taking it away from the whole thing he's doing is saying, I'm bringing this closer and closer to home to you, Fada. And your confusion, you've been seeing the Buddha in this text is out there as something profound and mysterious. Now I'm turning around and saying, this is really your sutra. This is really your own recitation. This is really your own heart. So this knowledge and vision of a Buddha is awakening. Awakening, he says, can be divided into four aspects. This is a formal categorization, different ways to translating this, but it comes down to initiating the Buddha's knowledge and vision. 2, the text says demonstrating the Buddha's knowledge and vision. 3, fathoming the Buddha's knowledge and vision. And 4, becoming one with the Buddha's knowledge and vision. If you investigate the initiating and demonstrating of the Buddha's knowledge and vision, you can easily fathom and become one with it. The Buddha's knowledge and vision is just your fundamental true nature becoming manifest. Whoa, this is really, there's, at the end of this paragraph and the end of the next paragraph, this is probably the most direct and succinct pointing of this that I've ever encountered. So one hand, he says, he brings up these 4 things, which you think, oh, well, this is something technical out there. Maybe monastics cultivate this, or maybe you have to be initiated into these 4 stages. But then he says, this is just your fundamental true nature becoming manifest. This is the true you manifesting. This is your blossoming of something that's inherent, intrinsic within you. So you have to look at this a little bit. There's not one way to interpret this. And if we had a lot of time, we were doing this in a class like we teach, we'd probably spend an hour and everybody would go around and say what they think these 4 things are. And it could be very interesting, and we could have a number of different range of things, and they may not all be wrong, and they may not all be right. There's not one way to come at this, but one way to think of it is there's an external dimension, and so the first 2 of the initiating or beginning, or the opening and the demonstrating, depending on how you translate that, could refer to you're meeting the teachings. This could be your formal instruction that you get the teaching. So the opening or the initiating means you come in to the class, to the teacher, to whatnot, or you're opening the text. You're initiating the text. And the next part of opening that text, sometimes it's called, some people use revealing or demonstrating. But what it really means is something then is revealed to you by opening the text. There's the next phase where you open it. You have to have some initiative. I mean, there's 100 different places probably you all could have gone tonight, and you came here. So that's initiating. You open something, and now you open the text, and we're opening the text. So now you're going in, and there's something's revealing here, something's coming out, something's being demonstrated. Okay? And as you go into that, there can be then a phase where it starts to make sense. And so you're fathoming it or you're understanding it. There's different ways this is translated. And sometimes people just say penetrating, or they use penetrating at the end. But in a sense, now you've gone to the deeper level. So first you come in, you open it. Then something starts to reveal. And now you're starting to cook with it. You're starting to understand that there's this bridge between. You say, oh, wow, I'm getting that. That makes sense. You might still have questions and whatnot. But the last one really is interesting is you become it. You actually then totally merge so that the text in your mind are not two, they're one. So these are levels of penetration. You could see it that way. You could also see it maybe from an inner aspect of an existential path of inquiry where there's this initiating, this opening. Something challenges, something opens for you, and you reorient and say, I want to get into this. I want to find out who I am. I want to look at this one great matter. There's an initiating, something. And then as you get into it, you start to explore that ground. Things become clear. There's a revealing that happens. You start to see parts of yourself that attune, and parts of that are not attuned. You start doing this adjustment. And eventually you start to own it. And it becomes sort of like your career almost of this path of integrating theory and practice and self-cultivation with understanding. And finally, you arrive and you become one with it. And you're not even aware there's a difference anymore. You've actually then totally gone from a beginning of a seed to a full blossoming within your own process of your own existential inquiry. And if you look at the Buddha's life, it actually mirrors this. The initiating is he goes forth. He has these questions he doesn't know. He goes from teacher to teacher. There's instruction. There's a beginning of understanding, but it's not completely total yet. And then he goes to the next level where he starts to really practice on his own, going into this third level of, I guess you could say it's awakening. And then finally, he becomes total embodiment of it, where there's nothing left. So it's a complete transmutation. And he's gone from an ordinary being to a Buddha in this process. So you can see it as external, but the key point here is to see it as it's just your true nature becoming manifest. This is the most important line. And then let's go to this next one, because this is really key. Be careful not to misconstrue the sutra's intent by supposing that the initiating, demonstrating, fathoming, becoming it describes is the Buddha's knowledge and vision, a knowledge and vision that we do not share in. This is not talking about the Buddha. That's what he's saying. Actually, it's a trick. When we're talking about the Buddha, we're talking about ourselves. All sutras are autobiographical. If you interpret it in this way, you discredit the sutra and demean the Buddha. Now, how can he do that? If you say, well, I'm worshiping, I'm praising the Buddha, this is about the Buddha. He says you discredit the sutra because you don't understand its true purpose and you demean the Buddha. Why do you demean the Buddha? This line is wonderful. Since the Buddha is already awakened, perfect in knowledge and vision, what would there be any news for him to do it again? It's sort of like, to me, this has got to be the line for him. It's like, whoa, I've been reciting this sutra, and it's not about the Buddha, it's about me. Because there's like, well, the Buddha appears in knowledge and vision. There's this like, why would it have to be in the text? It's not just describing what the Buddha did, it's describing what one should do. Oh, and so that's why he's saying it's demeaning it. Then this very, very important line. You should now believe that the knowledge and vision of a Buddha, is just your own mind. There is no other Buddha. Wow. So you chew on that one for a bit. Some people find this liberating and exhilarating, and some people find it a little scary, or even maybe have a doubt. And here's where the doubt comes in, because he's going to say, don't doubt yourself. This is when he started with these various doubts. Now he's coming back to Fa Da, and he's taking Fa Da through, and he says, this is talking about you, not talking about the Buddha. Then he goes to this line and says, but don't doubt yourself, because that is the Buddha. You are potentially the Buddha. It's got to be a very profound movement for him, because when you hear that, it's not for sure what you do with it. But it really brings it home. And that's what he's doing all the time. I don't know if anybody else struck when they get to that line. I've had people do this, and I'll quote that line. These are people I've known for years who are cultivating. Buddhists. And I'll quote that line. He says, "You shouldn't say stuff like that." I said, "Excuse me? You shouldn't say stuff like that. That's really disrespectful." I said, "I didn't say that." "Yes, you did." "No," I said, "I just quoting a text." "Where did you, what text? What line?" And I go and I put it, and I said, and I have one very close colleague say, "Oh my God, I've been reading that for years and I never saw that line before." And, and I'm trying to think something about that because I didn't see it. I recited this for 7 or 8 times before I actually caught this line. And I think there's something in here that's so profound and so close to home that there's a resistance to it because it really does put us on the hot seat. It really does put us on the hot seat because if you're saying there is no other Buddha, the Buddha is just your own mind. Wow. That means that the only thing to do then is to carve that Buddha out of your own being. Well, that's not as easy as just bowing to the Buddha and going home or making a wish. And so I think I maybe passed that line because in it there's a sort of exhortation or perhaps even an injunction. But certainly there's a little dis-ease because what it's saying is whatever you think liberation is, it's in your own hands. It's not going to be done by someone else. So this is that part where could be a little nervousness. But I'll stop here for tonight. We'll go into this. Next week's going to be our last class. We figured this out for the semester. And I would be totally dishonest to you to say we're going to get through the rest of this in the next class. So, because it's very rich, and I'll go through it just as we do. Some people, you think I go too slowly and you're getting bored. I can tell that. Other people think I'm going too fast and I wish I'd go more. And what was it, Lincoln? He said fool, but I use please. You can please some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't please all of the people all the time. And I never even please myself. So it's like, but I wanted to do one thing tonight to share with you because today is my birthday. And usually I don't announce it, but now it's like 70. Whoa, 70. And so my sister called me up this morning and she had me fooled. And because I answered the phone, I said, hello, I was really tired. It was like 7 o'clock she was calling. And she said, oh, is this the Berkeley retirement home? And I go, no, you must have the wrong number. She's going, ha ha. And I, what? And so she sort of drove the point home. She says, now you're 70. And I said, no, I'm not. I don't even remember today's my birthday. But what I was going to share with you is just a bit of a reflection, if I could, if you permit me to give some thought about this. Because it's somehow something about 70 makes you really reflective, meditative. Anyhow, what it's all about, even to make it to be 70 I'm appreciating is pretty remarkable. There's just a number of things that can happen to you in this interval in between being born and dying, and longevity is not a given. And there's just so many ways you can go out, and by luck or whatever, here I am at 70. And so I was thinking back to a poem I had when I was 20, a professor shared with me, and I wanted to read the poem to you tonight and then share some reflections on it because it's appropriate. So I'll read you the poem. This is a poem by Housman, one of my early poets I liked. He says, loveliest of trees, the cherry now is hung with bloom along the bough, and stands about the woodland ride, wearing white for Eastertide. Now of my threescore years and 10, 20 will not come again, and take from 70 springs a score, it only leaves me 50 more. And since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room, about the woodlands I will go to see the cherry hung with snow. It's a lovely poem. It's a reflection of a 20-year-old, and I encountered this when I was 20. And the professor wasn't 20; he was like 70. And so there was this very interesting exchange going on. And he said, loveliest of trees, the cherry now. He's saying the cherry tree blossoms with these wonderful flowers, and it's hung with bloom on the bough. I mean, it's in the fullness of its splendor. And stands about the woodland ride. The woodland ride is I'm going out for my ride and I'm just seeing this, and it's usually about Easter because it's spring, and so it's sort of appreciating the beauty and the wonder of this tree blooming. But now the reflection turns a little bit inward and says, "Now of my threescore years and 10." What's a score?
20.
Huh? 20. So threescore years and 10 makes 70. 20, 40, 60, and 10, 70. 20 will not come again. Okay? So now I will say of my threescore years and 10, 70 will not come again. But here he's got 20 of past and youth. So I still, and he says, and take from 70 springs a score. That leaves me 50 more. Okay? That's it. He's got 50. So now he's reflecting, I got 50 left. Now, some of you are thinking, I don't like this poem because I don't have 50. I got 30. I got 20. I got 10. For me, I'm down to 0. Okay? So, but he's doing this reflection of, oh, what's coming of this? So he says, and since to look at things in bloom, 50 springs are little room. This is a beautiful line. To really look at things, and my professor said, things in bloom doesn't just mean the flowers. He says it's a metaphor. Really? Duh, you're like, what does it mean? He says things that matter, things that are important. He says like family, like friends, like the things that your heart and passion are deeply involved in, the things that are really meaningful. And he says sometimes you don't see them. You pass them by. You miss the flowers because you're going too fast. But it's the really meaningful things in life, the day-to-day meaningful things. But in the longer thing, he says, it's a life that's lived in bloom. It's a life that's lived with meaning and purpose. You don't want to get to the point where you die and have regrets that you only passed through. So he was talking like this, and so it's like things in bloom is, oh, that's that. And he says, 50 springs is not enough time, really, to do that. So he says, what are you to do? You despair, and you don't try to do anything. No, the poem doesn't go there. He says, or you try to grab it all and try to get 50 and 5. And that doesn't work either. You just get indigestion and you still miss it. So he says, about the woodlands I will go. Meaning, my professor says, about my life I will go. About my journey I will go. To see the cherry hung with snow. I will pay attention to only those things in bloom that matter. And I will do that day to day in the 50 score, the 50 years I have left. And so, and then he turned, I can remember he was sitting there like this, and we were in the classroom going, wow, yeah, whoa, like 20 was like we thought we were at the prime, the height of life. And I looked at him at 70 and thought, wow, I thank God I'm never going to be there like that. And I was going, ha ha, like the cherry hung with snow, his white hair and beard, ha ha, it's like kicking the guy next to me, like there's and I looked in the mirror this morning and I'm hung with snow. It's like, I don't look like I did in 20. And then he took off his glasses. He said, some people die when they're 20, but they're not buried till they're 70. And then he went back to his book and I thought, whoa, what's that about? And basically, I thought about it meant if you do not go about the woodland in going after things in bloom, you die. You go about other things like the Sixth Patriarch, you get caught in appearances, you go into this emptiness, and 70 passes and you haven't gone after things in bloom. And so you die when you're 20 because that passion and drive, that deep curiosity is not there. And you're just going through the motions, you're acquiring things, you're making da-da-da-da-da. And you're not buried till you're 70, but in a sense, he said, you're already in your coffin. And so all the things that you've owned and possessed are just little toys in your coffin, but you're not really seeing things in bloom going after and so I just, tonight I came upon the poem again. I thought, wow, 20, 70. The interesting thing was this was the time that my best friend died as well, who was 20. I told you about he was killed in Vietnam. And it gave an extra impetus to me to then take this more seriously and basically just spend the last 50 years going about looking at things in bloom. And so here I am, and I am figuring if I got more than threescore and 10, I'll just continue to do it because it's too late to change. And it's really interesting. And for some reason, I don't feel my age. And so I will share that with you tonight. And I consider looking at things in bloom or hanging out with things in bloom as this class. You guys are my things in bloom. Truly, truly. And I get, so it's like you could say you're looking at the cherry trees in bloom, but I see now things in bloom as people. And the blooming of whatever is going on is, I'm absorbing the cherries, flowers, blossoms. So keep coming, if nothing else to make me feel good, uh, and keep blooming. And so that was my reflection I shared tonight on my 70th, for what it's worth. Any announcements? They're back from Taiwan. Six what? Oh, holidays. Oh, I thought you said holy days, and I was like, well, I mean, yes, okay, but. And again, just to remind you, there's an Amitabha Pure Land meditation session coming up for a week at the City of 10,000 Buddhas, and then 2 to 3 weeks of Chan meditation. That's an interesting also thing about bloom. I just thought about that. There's a famous Chan expression that says when you do real Chan, you don't have really good food and it's a little bit cold, and that gets you really concentrating, and then you hurt. Some of you are thinking, no, it looks really blissful. No, you hurt. If you sit more than a couple hours, you start to hurt. And so my teacher used to have an expression from Chan poetry. He says, the plum blossoms only smell fragrant and sweet, having endured the bitter winter cold. Oh, in other words, from that kind of intensity of the Chan and the cold and pushing yourself to that place, there's a blossoming that occurs. So it's another play off of Housman here of things in bloom. Sometimes it takes a little effort to get them to bloom, and sometimes maybe even a little sacrifice. And I say this, I jokingly say I'm here tonight after following things in bloom for 50 some years, but don't mistake that for, oh, it's just been easy. I want to be really honest with you. I had to make some very tough choices and decisions, and go to places I didn't know where it was going to lead because it meant following that heart. And so here I am, for whatever worse. My sisters would definitely convince me that I should have made other choices and decisions. But here it is. So what I'm suggesting is if you're going to do that, don't think it's just all a bed of roses, that you have to, there's bittersweet choices you make. And I would always say, though, although the returns are not maybe always what you expect, it's a good investment to follow that and not be worried about the loss you might take. I don't know how to say it more positively. But anyhow, let's do the transference. Our minds as one and radiant with light, share the fruits of peace with hearts of goodness, luminous and bright. If people hear and see how hands and hearts can find in giving unity, may our minds awake to grace, compassion, wisdom, and to joy. May kindness find
light. Break the darkness of endless night. Because our hearts are one, this world of pain turns into paradise. May all become compassionate and wise. May all become compassionate and wise. Ding